Chapter 37. Son of Abyss. It stayed quiet for an eerily long time. Marcus carefully opened his eyes when the fatal blow never came, and was immediately slapped in the face by a thought-stopping astonishment. He didn't understand what was happening, and barely believed what he was seeing. The creature had sunk its dental daggers into a thick crystalline barrier that had formed between them somehow. It was completely stuck. Not even its powerful jaws seemed able to grind through the colourless plate. But instead of taking the opportunity he was gifted to improve his position, Marcus could only stare at the comically absurd image with a goofy smile that was plastered across his face. The creature looked like a snake, trying to ingest an egg that was many times too big for its mouth, and nearly choking itself in a futile attempt to swallow the thing whole.
"Move, you moron! Blondie won't hold forever!"
A familiar voice barked at him while he was being dragged across the sand by his elbow.
"Maya?"
The surprise in his voice was emphasized by the stupefied look on his face. For a few seconds, he knew for sure that he had already died, and what he saw was no more than a trick of his own mind, in search of a way to cope with his gruesome demise.
"What are you doing here?"
he asked nonetheless. Maya ignored the question and flung him against the wall of the crater.
"Stay,"
she ordered without looking at him, and vanished from his sight. He followed the trail of her scent and raised his head, only to be stunned by a few more surprises. High above the crater, on top of the dune where he stood when he awaited the arrival of the hooded riders, he saw 3 horses. An intense-looking girl sat on a grey mare with her hands clasped and her jaws tightly clenched. She was sweating profusely, but cleverly used the moisture from her face to reinforce the barrier that was holding the creature in place.
"Please don't mess up. Please don't mess up. Please don't mess up."
He could hear her babbling under her breath. She was clearly panicked, but bravely fought through her fear like a weathered veteran. He couldn't believe his life was saved by Rain of Serenity Hills of all people, and involuntarily added yet another layer of confusion upon the heap of bewilderment that was already smeared across his face. But if Rain was out there in the Doran, then it could only mean one thing. He shifted his eyes slightly to the side and saw Cato fast asleep on a majestic black stallion that was undoubtedly gifted to him by Lord such-and-such from the faraway lands of so-and-so as a reward for the oh-so-heroic deeds he performed, which, but of course, led to the salvation of an uncountable number of lives. Such were the stories Lord Cato always brought back from his travels.
"Oh, Cato Knight, you beautiful bastard,"
Marcus mumbled to himself. Never in a million years would he have thought to be so happy to see his friend again. So much so that he even managed to light up a grin. Even removed from consciousness, Cato still wore an arrogant smirk on his arrogant face, like a genuine dipshit diplomat. Marcus had always said that Cato raised his nose too high to smell the shit he just stepped in, but those words had never rung truer than they did now. He refused to believe that Cato was able to sleep while Rain was engaged in combat, less than 2 feet away. But then he realized that Cato wasn't just sleeping. Something was different about him.
"Son of Abyss,"
Marcus grunted when he figured out what was wrong with his friend. He could hear the arrhythmic pounding inside Cato's chest and smell the vile chemicals that bathed in his sweat.
"Don't tell me you're intoxicated."
The longer he stared, the more certain he became. Over the irregular heartbeat, he heard Cato mutter utter gibberish about a tree that clawed through the sky and found its way into heaven, giving birth to gods and goddesses. He heard nonsensical babblings about cannibalistic shadows in the dark that were controlled by unseen puppeteers. He heard vivid imageries, sketched in euphemisms, graphically detailing events that couldn't be anything other than sexual encounters. Although he didn't know what a supernova was supposed to be, nor did he want to know. But he did hope for the sake of Cato's well-being that it was some kind of nickname he gave Aisha.
"Recall your monster, and you might live to see another day,"
he suddenly heard another familiar voice say from the far side of the crater. There he saw Raven standing behind Valise with a dagger pressed against her throat. She wasn't terribly impressed by the threat, however. Not even the thin stream of blood trickling from her neck seemed to faze her in the slightest. He wanted to shout at Raven and warn him of the true danger the young girl posed, but before he was able to do so, Valise already spun around, swift and silent like a sudden change in the wind. A chain of red droplets hung around her neck for a moment before clattering onto the scorching sand. Raven froze, completely stunned by the abruptness of her careless action. He retreated a few steps and ignited a white flame inside his free hand as a warning.
Surrender peacefully,
He said, sounding a lot more confident than he actually felt. Valise flashed a wide grin that further deepened his unease.
Lubora. Key back.
She wheezed through reddened teeth as alarming amounts of blood flooded down her chest. Raven flinched in surprise, but was immediately forced to evade a few whipping strikes in quick succession. All of a sudden he was standing across a monster that was almost twice his size. He glanced at the creature's missing arm and its shredded torso, deducing that it must have been Marcus who inflicted the damage. At the same time, he realized all too well who was still fighting, and who was left helplessly naked as the day he was born. Out of nowhere, Maya appeared in their midst, thrusting a spear at the cone-shaped head, but the weapon barely put a scratch in the creature's armored skin.
Maya, what are you doing?
Marcus shouted from afar.
Don't attack it head on, dumbass!
She rolled her eyes and must have somehow forgotten about her brother's immaculate hearing when she whispered a sharp rebuke under her breath. It wasn't the first time that Marcus had been told to mind his own fucking business by his little sister. Usually that was enough to flare up his anger and trigger a heated argument that could last for hours. This time, however, he meekly obeyed and kept his lips sealed. He had no choice but to watch everything unfold from a distance like a spectator, and to have faith in Maya, in all his comrades.
Rain! Do it again!
Raven yelled and looked up at the tiny figure some 50 yards above him. Without delay, a new sheet of ice formed around the creature's head and arm, once again trapping the towering monstrosity like a criminal in a pillory. Valise followed Raven's stare to the top of the dune.
Umbora.
She croaked, her eyes shimmering with delight. The black symbols on her cheeks slowly meandered to the bridge of her nose. Raven didn't like the unsettling look he presumed was meant for his sister. He immediately gathered his aura and sprinted toward the young girl who was drenched in blood. The white flames followed his movement like the tail of a comet. He was less than a yard removed from her when he let his fist fly to unleash his fury. But something felt strange about the whole situation. He didn't understand what was happening. It was as if he had awoken in a nightmare all of the sudden. He remembered hearing something that sounded like a snap of fingers, and the next thing he knew, his blazing knuckles were on a collision course with his baby sister. Her wide-eyed terror was the only thing that seized his attention. Nothing else seemed to exist at that moment. He did everything in his power to divert the trajectory of his attack, but it was impossible to derail such force. Everything was already set in motion, and an impact seemed inevitable. A raging torrent of white flames erupted from his arms like an avalanche, scorching everything along the way to ash in an instant. He dropped to his knees with a face full of tears as the flames crashed into the crater wall.
Don't be so dramatic, Lieutenant. Get yourself together.
He looked up and saw Maya smiling back at him with Rain tightly held in her arms. Immediately he jumped to his feet. Never in his life had he felt such relief and gratitude before.
Rain, I'm so sorry,
he said while blasting her forehead with consecutive kisses.
I don't know what happened. Please forgive me.
Rain barely responded to her brother's emotional embrace. She was staring wide-eyed into nothingness, with a demeanor that was transfixed with trauma. But her absence also meant that the glacial barrier she created to keep the creature in check was no longer reinforced with her aura. Maya waved an arm in an arc and sent the siblings to a safe distance next to her brother. They were both too shaken up to be of any help to her. With her other arm, she pulled a shield out of an invisible portal and raised it in front of her face to protect herself from a sudden incoming strike. The force of the willowy limb flung the shield out of her hand like a paper fan. She immediately extracted a spear from a portal behind her back, but gasped in surprise when a monstrous head filled with razor-sharp daggers lunged at her at a frightening pace. The sound of the creature's snapping jaws was like dozens of hammers striking an anvil at the same time. But the lack of flesh and bones between its teeth seemed to confuse the creature. It quickly turned around to find its prey, but shrieked in pain before it was able to catch a glimpse of her. Maya plunged her spear into the creature's ribcage that was already torn to shreds by her brother's attack. She didn't allow it the chance to recuperate and drove a curved sword into the roof of the creature's open mouth as it bent over in agony. And to make absolutely sure the creature wouldn't stand up again, she pierced another sword through the veiled hole on the side of its cone-shaped head until the tip came out bloody at the other end. She wasted no time witnessing the final spasms of the creature and quickly raised her head to the top of the dune. Felice was brushing her hand through Cato's hair and seemed enthralled by the 2 strands of silver she held between her fingers. She was leaning forward to give him a kiss on the cheek, but suddenly felt the sensation of cold steel between her eyes. She stumbled back a few steps and ran a finger over the sword that went through her skull. Her eyes widened, but not in shock or horror. Her eyes widened in awe.
Ava!
She croaked. Her voice was like a breeze of dry leaves scraping across a frozen lake. A bright grin flared up across her face that brought no warmth to her icy blue eyes. She laboriously shuffled forward and raised a hand to reach for Maya's face, but cracks had begun to form on her skin like a desiccated riverbed. Before she was able to take another step, her arm broke off in pieces like an eroded mountainside and tumbled to the sand with dull, tedious thuds.
We will meet again,
she still managed to say as her entire body disintegrated and crumbled to a pile of dust. It stayed quiet for a while as Maya stood rooted to the spot, completely stunned from sheer disbelief. She was staring, eyes dilated and shaking, at the blood-soaked cloak at her feet. It was the only thing remaining that proved the existence of the strange girl. The bizarre conclusion to the clash was enough to unsettle any stone-hearted warrior, but it was the fact that she was called Ava that truly broke her composure. In that instance, the name Ava resonated with her in such a profound way. It felt as if someone finally saw her for who she truly was. It was the very same way Cato made her feel whenever he stared at her with pure adoration in his eyes. She absently turned to the black stallion, and sure enough, there it was. His face was halfway buried inside the mane of his horse. His eyes were still droopy from the heavy dose of poppy crystals he ingested to numb the pain in order to get him through the Doran. He had a silly smile on his face that he probably wouldn't have if he were aware of the bloodshed that just occurred. But the look that she was hoping to see was definitely there. He stared at her, as if he saw the holy goddess herself. She forced herself to shake off the apprehension and sent him a smile back.
Maya!
Marcus screamed from below while clambering his way out of the massive crater.
Maya!
He screamed again as he laboured himself over the edge and started running up the hill.
Maya!
A euphoric grin was smeared across his face when he finally reached the top of the dune. He was ready to show her his gratitude with a loving embrace, but the grin instantly melted to a grimace of dismay when he was faced with something not even his most terrifying nightmares would dare to show him. Maya had no mind for him, barely even noticed he existed at all. Maya was heavily entangled in a passionate kiss with Cato.
Son of Abyss,